So today we're going to continue our exploration of the coordinate plane by looking at distance. And so when we talk about distance on the coordinate plane, we're going to be looking at finding the distance between 2 points on the coordinate plane by using absolute value. So if you recall, absolute value from topic 3 was the distance from 0. So we're going to use those distances from 0 to help us determine how far apart two coordinates are. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go to the example on page 198. So finding distance on 2 points between the coordinate planes, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify the two coordinates that we're going to use. So it says Tammy drew a map of her neighborhood. How far is it from Lee's house to school? So we first need to identify the different coordinates. So if we take a look at Lee's coordinates are going to be -4, -3. And then the school's coordinates are going to be -4, 2. So when we go to using absolute value, the first thing that we need to look at is we need to look at whether or not our distance is going to be in the same quadrant or it's going to be in different quadrants, because that's going to impact whether or not I'm going to be adding absolute value or subtracting absolute value. So if I take a look here, they're in different quadrants. Lee's house is in quadrant 3, the school is in quadrant 2. So that means I'm going to be adding my absolute values. So to determine which absolute values I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the coordinate, whether it's the x or y, that's different. So if you notice between these 2 points, -4 is the same in both coordinates. It runs along that point on my coordinate graph. So I'm not going to worry about -4. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to worry about the y coordinates because they are different values. So I'm going to take the absolute value of -3, so my first y coordinate, and I'm going to add that to the absolute value of 2. So I'm going to rewrite this, and when I rewrite it, I'm going to end up with 3 added to 2, which is going to be 5. So the distance between Lee's house and school is going to be 5 units. Okay, so when I'm looking for absolute value, I'm going to be first identifying the coordinates if I need to identify the coordinates, determine whether or not I'm going to add or subtract. I'm going to add if they are in different quadrants and subtract if they're in the same quadrant, and then I'm going to use the absolute value. And if you recall, absolute value are always positive numbers because it's representing distance. Distance is always a positive value. So when we do this, I don't actually need a coordinate grid to identify the distance between 2 points. And in fact, a lot of times, because it's very easy to miscount on a coordinate grid, the absolute value is going to be more reliable than you're going through and counting those points. All right, so let's take a look at the convince me. So it says to find the distance between the school and the playground, would you add or subtract the absolute values of the y coordinates? So if we first, let's go and pull out those coordinates. So I'm looking for school and playground. So school and playground, they're in the same quadrant. So because they're in the same quadrant, so one way to think about it is same, you subtract. Different, you add. So because they are in the same quadrant, I'm going to subtract the y coordinates of the school and the playground. I'm not going to subtract the x coordinates because the x coordinates are going to be the same. School is going to be -4, 2. The playground is going to be -4, 5. So let me show you what this looks like when I go ahead and subtract it. So I always write it first in absolute values, even if both values are positive. So I'm going to do the absolute value of 5. I always take the greater number. 5 is going to be the larger number. So I'm going to do the absolute value of 5, subtract the absolute value of 2. And the reason I took the larger number instead of doing 2 subtract 5 is distance is going to be a positive value, and 5 subtract 2 is going to give me a positive value because the absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of 2 is 2. So it's going to be 3 units away. And I always need to make sure that I write units as my measurement. So because I'm talking about distance, I need to have a unit as part of my answer. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at your guided practice on page 199. And so the very first problem says, let me let this load. So it says, how would you use absolute values to find the distance between the school and the store? So if we take a look back on the previous page and we look at the school and the store, the first thing we need to look at is, are they in the same quadrant or the different quadrant? Because remember, I said that, hey, when I'm in the same quadrant, I subtract absolute values. But when I'm in different quadrants, so when my coordinates are in different quadrants, I'm going to add absolute values. So same subtract, different is I'm going to add my absolute values. Okay. So school and store are going to be in the same quadrant. So what I'm going to do is I am going to subtract. So I'm going to subtract the values. So the school is going to be -4, 2. The store is going to be -1, 2. So I need to identify which coordinates are going to be different. Well, my x coordinates are both my y coordinates are both the same, so I'm not going to do anything with those. I'm going to ignore them. My x coordinates are what's going to be different, so I'm going to subtract the absolute value of -4, and I'm going to subtract the absolute value of -1 from the absolute value of -4. So when I rewrite this, this becomes 4 subtract 1, which equals 3. So my answer is going to be 3 units away. All right, so my value there is 3 units away because I found the absolute value. Absolute value is distance, so it's always positive. So my answers are always going to be positive values. Okay, let's take a look at number 2. To find the distance between 2 points using the coordinates, when do you add their absolute values and when do you subtract them? So if they are in the same quadrant, so nice way to think about it is that alliteration. Same, I'm going to subtract absolute value. Different, I'm going to add absolute value. Same, subtract, different, add. Okay. All right, let's take a look and let's do some work with 3 through 8. So our very first quadrant, the very first coordinates that we have is we have -5, 2, and -5, 6. So just by looking at these, I need to determine if they're going to be in the same quadrant or different quadrant. So both x's are negative and both y's are positive. So that tells me this is going to be in quadrant 3, not quadrant 3, quadrant 2. And this is going to be in quadrant 2. So both values are in the same quadrant. So that means I'm going to subtract their absolute value. So I look for the coordinates that are different. So -5 and -5 are the same. My x coordinates are the same. So I'm going to be subtracting my y coordinates. So I'm going to take the absolute value of 6 because that's going to give me a larger value. That's going to give me a value of 6. And then I'm going to subtract the absolute value of 2, which is going to give me 2. 6 subtract 2 is going to be 4. So my answer is going to be 4 units. Now, at a minimum, what I want you to show me in terms of your work is I want you to show me the absolute value equation. That's the piece that I want you to show me. So if we take a look at our next one, I'll show you what the minimum is that I'm looking for. So we have -3, -1, and 2, -1. So identify the coordinates that are different. It's my x coordinates. And then I need to determine, am I in the same quadrant or different quadrant? They are going to be in different quadrants. This is going to be in quadrant 4. This is going to be in quadrant 3. So because they're in different quadrants, I'm going to add. Remember, same as subtract, different, I add. in this case, it doesn't matter which value I'm going to do. So I'm going to do the absolute value of 1 added to the absolute value of 2. And when I do the absolute value of 1 added to the absolute value of 2, I get 3 units. Oh, I totally boogered that one. It's not going to be 2. I'm sorry, it's not going to be 1. It's going to be 3. So let's fix that. Didn't catch that. And so that'll happen sometimes where you will add the wrong thing. And if you add the wrong thing, hopefully you catch it like I did and you make that correction. So let's try that again. So it might help you to circle the coordinates that are going to be different because those are the values that you're going to do. So the absolute value of -3. So I'm just going to rewrite. The absolute value of -3 added to the absolute value of 2 is going to give me 5 units. That looks like a much better answer to those coordinates. So the distance between these two coordinates is going to be 5 units. Yeah, because we're going to take a look at 4.5, -3 and 3/10, and 4.5 and 5.5. So identify the quadrants or the coordinates that are going to be different. So I'm going to go ahead and circle them so I don't make the mistake that I did in the last problem. These are going to be the two values that I'm working with. Because the x coordinates are the same, I don't do anything with them. They're going to be on the same line within my coordinate grid. Now I'm going to look, am I in the same quadrant or am I in different quadrants? I'm in a different quadrant because here I have a negative, here I have a positive. So because I'm in a different quadrant, I'm going to add. So I'm going to add the absolute value of 3 and 3/10 to the absolute value of 5 and 5/10. And what that gives me is it's going to give me 8 and 8/10 unit. So again, what I'm looking to see is I'm looking to see you model your thinking by giving me this problem for every one of your distance that you are solving for. So anytime you're using absolute value, I expect to see the addition problem or the subtraction problem with your answer showing the distance. And because I'm doing distance, I need to have a unit of measurement. My unit of measurement on a coordinate graph is going to be units. Do a couple more. So the next one that I have is I have -1 and 6/10, -1. And I have 6/10 and -1. So again, to avoid that error that I made earlier, I'm going to circle the coordinates that are going to be different. So I'm going to do -1 and 6/10 and 6/10. And then I'm going to look and see, am I in the same quadrant or am I in different? And again, here I have a positive x, here I have a negative x. So I'm going to be in this different quadrant. So I'm going to add. So I'm going to take the absolute value of 1 and 6/10, and I'm going to add that to the absolute value of 6/10, and I'm going to see what I get. So if I'm not sure, because if I don't know what 1.6 is added to 6 and I need to do that off to the side, I'm going to do that off to the side. So when I add those two together, 6 and 1 are going to make 12. I'm going to regroup that 1. 1 and 1 is going to be 2. So my answer is going to be 2 and 2/10 units. Okay. Next one I'm going to take a look at is I have 5.5 and -7.5. And my other coordinate is going to be 5.5 and -1.5. So again, circle the coordinates that are going to be different. So 5.5 are the same. I'm looking at my y coordinates. This is in the same quadrant because I have positive x's and negative y's. So same quadrant means I'm going to subtract to find my distance between the two coordinates. So I'm going to take the absolute value of -7.5 and I'm going to subtract from it the absolute value of -1 and 1/2, which is going to give me a value of 6 units. Okay, so one thing you really need to remember is that when you are looking for the absolute value, same quadrant means you subtract your absolute value. Different quadrant means you're going to add your absolute values together to find your answers. You need to show me your equations that you are using to find your answer.